All right, so we're diving into Brené Brown's Daring Greatly today.
Okay.
I feel like this deep dive is going to get pretty deep.
Yeah.
You know, vulnerability, shame, worthiness. I mean, it's pretty clear you're ready to tackle the heavy stuff.
Right.
And I have to say, I am too.
It's a fascinating topic for sure.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I think that quote from the book really sums it up. You know, the one that says vulnerability is
Vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy.
yes, love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. But then she goes on and says it's
Yeah, it's also the root of...
it's also the source of shame, fear, and disconnection.
Right, shame, fear, and disconnection. So how do we...
That's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. How do we reconcile those two, seemingly opposite experiences?
Yeah, I think that's where the concept of wholeheartedness comes in.
Okay.
You know, Brown spent all this time researching what she calls wholehearted people.
And, people who really live with a deep sense of worthiness and connection.
Okay.
And what she found is that their willingness to embrace vulnerability is like, it was a key factor in their well-being and their success.
Okay, but that's a lot easier said than done.
Right, it is.
I mean, for most of us.
Absolutely.
We're wired to avoid vulnerability.
Yeah, it feels
scary.
It feels scary and risky.
Right. You know, who wants to put themselves out there like that?
Totally. And I struggle with it.
We're all conditioned to protect ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like from getting hurt.
Yes.
And as Brown points out, our culture kind of reinforces these tendencies, especially for men.
Especially for men.
You know, think about that box metaphor she uses.
Oh, yeah.
The box.
It's a powerful one.
Yeah, it's like they're confined to this tiny box of acceptable emotions and behaviors.
Right. And anything outside that box is seen as weak or unmanly.
Yeah, and it's so
limiting.
Limiting. Yeah.
It's like they're constantly trying to shrink themselves to fit into this rigid definition of masculinity and the pressure to perform, to be strong and stoic all the time.
It can be suffocating.
Suffocating, exactly.
That reminds me of that story in the book about the man who initially resisted going to one of Brown's talks. He was
so uncomfortable.
He was so uncomfortable with the whole idea of vulnerability and shame that he tried to get out of going. I mean, doesn't that just show you how deep?
Exactly. That just shows you how deeply ingrained these fears are, especially for men, right?
Right.
Like they're taught to suppress their emotions, to man up and just push through discomfort.
Right. But as Brown argues, that avoidance, it comes at a cost.
It does. It does.
It leads to disconnection, loneliness, and a diminished sense of self-worth.
Right. And it can manifest in all these unhealthy behaviors, right?
Yeah, like what?
Oh, think about all the ways we numb ourselves.
Okay.
To avoid those uncomfortable emotions.
Okay, so like
excessive work, alcohol, mindless scrolling, overeating.
Yeah, been there.
Those shadowed comforts, as Brown calls them, they might, offer temporary relief.
Right.
But they ultimately keep us from experiencing the fullness of life.
So if avoiding vulnerability is so detrimental, then how do we start to shift those deeply ingrained patterns?
Right.
I mean, it's not like we could just flip a switch.
Right. It's definitely a process.
Yeah.
It's a process. And I think it starts with recognizing our shame triggers.
Okay.
Those specific situations or comments that make us feel small, inadequate, or unworthy.
And those triggers can be so sneaky.
They are. Sometimes
they come from the most unexpected places.
Right.
Like a seemingly harmless comment from a coworker can trigger this whole cascade of negative self-talk.
Absolutely. So then what do we do?
So that's where practicing critical awareness comes in.
Okay.
It's about pausing when we feel that shame response and asking ourselves, is this message true?
Okay.
Where is this coming from?
Yeah.
Is it based on facts or is it just an old story I'm telling myself?
It's like we need to become shame detectives.
Yes.
Investigating the evidence.
Exactly.
Challenging those negative thoughts.
Yeah, and that's a skill. It takes practice.
It does.
But it's essential for developing what's called shame resilience.
Oh. And shame resilience is?
It's the ability to move through those difficult emotions without shutting down or lashing out.
Okay, so we're talking about recognizing our shame triggers.
Right.
practicing critical awareness. What's next?
And then reaching out for support.
Oh, and that's counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, because you want to hide.
Right. When we're feeling ashamed, we want to withdraw, isolate ourselves. But Brown, she emphasizes the importance of sharing our stories with trusted people who can offer empathy and understanding.
I think there's a saying like, shame cannot survive being spoken.
Exactly.
When we bring those hidden feelings out into the light.
Yeah, they lose their power.
They lose their power.
And we realize we're not alone.
That's so important.
You know, everyone experiences shame, even those people who seem to have it all together.
Yeah.
And that shared vulnerability can create a powerful sense of connection and belonging.
Which brings us back to that idea of wholeheartedness.
Right. Exactly.
And the importance of vulnerability in building those authentic relationships.
Exactly. It's in those moments of shared vulnerability that we truly connect with others on a deeper level.
Right.
And that connection is what gives our lives meaning and purpose. But, you know, it's not just about our personal relationships, right? This idea of embracing vulnerability, it plays a crucial role in other areas of our lives. Right. Parenting and the workplace.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm excited to dive into those topics a little bit later.
Yeah.
But before we move on, is there anything else you want to highlight about this initial exploration of vulnerability and shame?
Well, I think what's striking is that Brown isn't advocating for, you know, some Pollyannish view of vulnerability, like where we're just spilling our guts all the time.
Right. No, yeah.
You know, it's about being discerning about who we choose to be vulnerable with and being mindful of the context.
So it's about being strategic and intentional with our vulnerability.
Exactly. Knowing that it's a powerful tool that can be used for both good and bad. Yeah. You know? And it requires us to develop that shame resilience muscle so we can navigate those difficult emotions with grace and courage.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It's like we're training for an emotional marathon, you know.
Right.
Building up our stamina and endurance so we can handle the inevitable ups and downs of life without getting completely derailed.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's a journey that requires us to be both brave and compassionate with ourselves and others.
This has been so insightful already. I can already feel those wheels turning in my head.
Yeah.
I'm ready to explore how these ideas about vulnerability and shame play out in those other areas of life that you talked about, like parenting and the workplace.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so onward to part 2.
Awesome.
So we've talked about vulnerability being so essential to living a wholehearted life.
Right.
But how did that play out when it comes to parenting?
Right.
I mean, isn't there a part of us that just wants to shield our kids from all the messiness?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a natural instinct, you know, to want to protect our children from pain and disappointment.
Right.
But, you know, Brown points out in the book that by doing that, we're actually doing them a disservice.
So are you saying that we should intentionally be exposing our kids?
No.
Okay.
It's not about intentionally exposing them.
Okay.
It's more about modeling vulnerability in our own lives.
Oh, okay.
Remember, kids are like sponges, right?
Yeah.
They're absorbing everything they see. And here, if we're constantly putting up this armor, avoiding difficult conversations, pretending we have it all figured out, they're going to learn to do the same.
That makes sense. Actions speak louder than words.
Exactly.
We can tell our kids to be brave, to be open-hearted, but if we're not showing them what that looks like,
it falls flat.
It's not going to resonate.
Right.
So what are we supposed to do then?
Well, you know, think about those moments.
Okay.
When things inevitably go wrong.
Right.
Like we make a mistake, or we experience a setback,
Yeah.
or we have a conflict with someone. Those are actually perfect opportunities to show our kids what healthy vulnerability looks like.
So instead of trying to hide our imperfections and pretend everything's fine, we can use those moments as teaching tools.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Like, imagine this.
Okay.
You spill your coffee all over the kitchen floor.
Okay, yeah.
First thing in the morning.
Happens all the time.
Right. Instead of getting all frustrated, you know, cursing under your breath, you take a deep breath.
Okay.
And you say to your kids, wow, I'm feeling really flustered right now.
Okay.
Spilling this coffee feels like a terrible way to start the day, but I'm going to clean this up.
Yeah.
And I know it will get better.
Wow. That's so simple.
It is simple.
But powerful.
But it's powerful because you're acknowledging your own frustration.
Yeah.
We're modeling a healthy coping mechanism.
Right.
You're teaching your kids that it's okay to have negative emotions.
Right. It's normal.
Right.
Yeah.
And that they don't have to be perfect all the time.
You're also creating a space where they can feel safe.
Exactly.
Expressing their own emotions.
Yeah, absolutely.
This reminds me of that story in the book about Brown's daughter, Ellen.
Oh, yeah.
Who was feeling like an outsider during those recess soccer games.
Oh, that was heartbreaking.
It was.
She kept getting picked last for the teams.
Yeah.
And she was feeling really left out and alone.
And instead of Brown trying to, fix the situation or downplay Ellen's feelings, she actually shared her own experience with feeling like an outsider.
It's amazing how that simple act of shared vulnerability can create such a deep connection.
It's true. It's like she wasn't just, Ellen's mom in that moment.
Right.
She was someone who understood her pain, who had been there too.
Exactly.
And that feeling of being seen and understood can be so healing.
It's so validating.
Especially for kids.
Especially for kids, yeah.
Who are struggling with shame and self-doubt.
Absolutely. It's like you're saying, hey, you're not alone in this.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Right.
And it's tough, but we're going to get through it together.
So we're normalizing those difficult emotions.
Exactly.
Creating a family culture where it's okay to not be okay.
Right.
Right.
And that brings us to another important point from the book,
Okay.
the need to be mindful of our language.
Okay.
Especially when we're correcting our kids' behavior.
You're talking about that, the difference between shame-based language and guilt-based language.
Yeah, shame versus guilt, right.
Exactly, because shame says you're bad, while guilt says you made a bad choice.
Okay, so one attacks the child.
And one focuses on the behavior.
Exactly.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's say
Okay.
your child throws a toy
and
accidentally hits their sibling.
Okay.
A shame-based response would be something like,
okay.
You're so mean. Why are you always hurting your brother?
Ouch. That's
right.
That would sting.
And a guilt-based response would be more like,
okay.
Throwing toys can hurt people.
Okay.
It was an accident, but it's important to be more careful.
So you're acknowledging the mistake.
Right.
But you're not making them feel like a bad person.
Exactly. You're separating their identity from their actions.
And teaching them that they're still worthy.
Yes, that they are inherently worthy of love and belonging.
Even when they mess up.
Even when they mess up. Absolutely.
But what about those times when our own shame gets triggered?
Ugh.
As parents, we're not perfect.
No.
There are moments when we lose our cool.
Right.
We yell at our kids. We make decisions we regret.
We've all been there.
Those moments are so tough.
They are, and they often bring up a lot of shame for parents.
Right.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
We don't have to be perfect.
Okay.
In fact, our imperfections can be some of our greatest teaching tools.
I like that reframing.
Right.
So instead of beating ourselves up, we can use it as an opportunity to model accountability.
Absolutely.
And repair.
Yes.
So imagine you've had a rough day.
Okay.
And you snap at your kid over something insignificant. Later, when you've calmed down, you go back to your child and say, hey, I'm really sorry I yelled at you earlier. I was feeling stressed and I took it out on you, which wasn't fair.
Right.
Can you forgive me?
That takes a lot of courage.
It does. But you're admitting that you're not perfect.
Yeah.
That you made a mistake. But you're willing to own it and make amends.
And that kind of vulnerability can be so powerful for kids to witness.
Absolutely.
It teaches them that making mistakes is a part of being human.
Yeah.
And that it's important to take responsibility for our actions.
This is all great.
Yeah.
But I have to say, it feels kind of overwhelming.
I hear you.
It's like there's already so much pressure to get it right as parents.
Right.
And now we're adding this whole other layer of vulnerability and shame resilience.
Right. But that's why it's so important to remember
that
we're not alone in this journey.
Okay.
We all struggle with parenting.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes.
It's true.
The key is to be kind to ourselves.
Right.
Ask for support when we need it. Keep learning and growing.
And remember that daring greatly as a parent, it doesn't mean you have to have it all figured out.
Right.
It's about being present, being authentic,
Yeah.
being willing to show up for your kids, even in your imperfections.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And I think that same spirit of daring greatly applies to another important area of our lives, the workplace.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. We've talked a lot about personal relationships and parenting. But how does this idea of embracing vulnerability play out in a professional setting?
It's incredibly relevant.
Okay.
I mean, think about it.
Oh.
So many workplaces are built on this culture of perfectionism.
Yeah.
Where people are afraid to make mistakes, afraid to admit they don't have all the answers, afraid to ask for help.
It's like everyone's walking around with this armor on.
Exactly, trying to protect themselves from being judged.
Right.
Or seen as incompetent.
And that kind of environment, I imagine, just stifles creativity.
Totally. It stifles creativity, innovation, genuine connection.
Right, yeah.
But what Brown argues in Daring Greatly is that vulnerability is actually essential for building trust, fostering collaboration, creating a more authentic and fulfilling work experience.
So how does that work in practice?
Well, I think it starts with leaders. Just being willing to show their humanity.
Okay.
Instead of pretending to have all the answers, they're willing to admit when they don't know something, ask for input from their team, and make mistakes without fear of being punished.
So they're creating a space where it's safe to be imperfect.
Exactly.
To learn and to grow.
Yeah, and that kind of vulnerability is contagious.
Okay.
When leaders model those behaviors,
yeah,
it gives permission to others to do the same.
So instead of that culture of fear and perfectionism, you're creating a culture of trust and learning.
And that can have a profound impact on employee morale, engagement, and ultimately the success of the organization as a whole.
I can see how that would be really empowering.
Right.
But it also seems risky.
It does.
What if people take advantage of that vulnerability?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's important to be discerning, about who we choose to be vulnerable with, even in the workplace. But as Brown points out, the alternative, which is living and working in a state of constant armor, is far more detrimental in the long run.
So it's like we're trading authenticity and connection for a false sense of security.
Exactly. And that false sense of security ultimately leads to disengagement, burnout, lack of creativity.
Right. Okay, so what are some practical things that leaders can do?
Yeah, that's a good question.
To start cultivating a more vulnerability-based culture?
Well, I think it starts with being mindful of their own language and behavior. Are they modeling vulnerability? Are they creating a space where it's safe for others to do the same? Are they fostering a culture of trust and respect?
So walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And it's also about being intentional about creating opportunities for vulnerability.
So how do you do that?
Well, this could look like, starting meetings with a check-in round where people can share what's on their mind, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, like that.
Encouraging employees to take risks, to experiment without fear of failure, and also being willing to have those difficult conversations, give and receive feedback in a way that is constructive and supportive.
This all sounds great.
Yeah.
But I imagine it's a huge cultural shift for a lot of organizations.
It is.
This isn't something that just happens overnight.
You're right. It takes time.
Yeah.
It takes effort. A willingness to challenge those deeply ingrained beliefs and systems that are often based on fear and control.
But the rewards, as we've seen in Daring Greatly, the rewards of embracing vulnerability, both in our personal lives and at work, are worth it.
They're worth the effort.
Yeah, it's about creating a world where we can all show up authentically, connect with each other on a deeper level, and make a meaningful contribution.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've explored how daring greatly can transform our personal relationships, our parenting, and our workplaces. But what about those everyday moments, the small interactions that might not seem particularly significant? How do we bring this spirit of vulnerability into the mundane aspects of our lives?
That's such a great question, because ultimately it's those small moments of courage, those everyday choices to show up authentically that add up to a life well lived.
So are you ready to dive into those details?
Absolutely. Let's keep going.
Okay, so we're talking about these small everyday moments where we can choose courage over comfort.
Right.
But I'm kind of having trouble picturing what that looks like.
Yeah.
Outside of like those bigger life areas we've already talked about.
Right. Well, I think it's about recognizing those subtle opportunities where we might be tempted to like hold back or play it safe, to avoid potential discomfort.
Okay.
And then consciously choosing to step outside our comfort zone.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
But can you maybe give me like a specific scenario?
Sure. Imagine you're at a social gathering.
Okay.
And you see someone you'd really love to connect with.
Yeah.
But you're hesitating to approach them.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling yourself they probably don't want to talk to you.
Oh, yeah.
Or you worry about saying something awkward.
I know that feeling.
Right. That inner critic can be so loud in those moments.
Yes.
But what if, instead of letting fear dictate your actions, you take a deep breath and you walk over to that person anyway?
I mean, that takes guts.
It does. It does. But it's also an act of daring greatly.
Okay.
And who knows?
Yeah.
That simple act of courage could lead to a wonderful conversation.
Right.
A new friendship.
Mm-hmm.
Even an unexpected opportunity.
Yeah, I see your point. It's about challenging those self-imposed limitations. Being willing to put ourselves out there.
Yeah.
Even if it feels a bit scary.
And it doesn't have to be about, like, these grand gestures.
Okay.
It could be something as simple as giving a genuine compliment to a stranger, or expressing gratitude to someone who's helped you, or even just sharing a personal story with a coworker.
Yeah, those are really good examples.
Yeah.
It's like those seemingly small acts of vulnerability can actually have a big impact on our own well-being and the connections we create with others.
Exactly. And here's the thing.
Okay.
Daring greatly doesn't always lead to positive outcomes.
For sure.
Sometimes we put ourselves out there and we get rejected or things don't go as planned.
And that can be really discouraging.
Yeah, it can.
Especially if we've already put in a lot of effort to be vulnerable.
Right, but it's in those moments that our shame resilience is truly tested.
So it's not about avoiding those negative experiences altogether.
Right, it's not about avoiding them. It's about learning how to navigate them in a way that preserves our sense of worthiness.
So it's about remembering that our value as human beings, it's not dependent on external validation or success.
Exactly.
Right, because it's so easy to get caught up.
It is.
In that cycle of striving for perfection and feeling like we're not enough if we fall short.
Absolutely, and that's why Brown emphasizes the importance of self-compassion.
Self-compassion.
Yeah, which is one of the key elements of wholeheartedness.
Okay.
It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a close friend who is going through a difficult time.
So instead of, berating ourselves for making a mistake or having a setback, we offer ourselves those words of comfort and encouragement.
Exactly. We can acknowledge that we're human, that we're doing the best we can, and that we deserve love and support, even when we're struggling.
Yeah, that's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
It's like recognizing that imperfection, it's not a weakness, but it's a part of the human experience.
And it's about choosing to embrace our whole selves, flaws and all, because it's in those imperfections that our true beauty and resilience lie.
I love that it brings us back to that core message of daring greatly.
Yeah.
That vulnerability is not weakness.
Right.
It's our greatest measure of courage.
I love that.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into daring greatly, what's the one takeaway you want to leave our listener with today?
I keep coming back to that quote from Brown.
Okay.
Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome.
That's a good one.
Each time you choose vulnerability, you're choosing courage, and that is powerful.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure diving into this book with you.
Likewise.
And to our listener, keep daring greatly.